Hello, my name is Pete Tseronis, and I am super excited today to be moderating and participating in a conversation that Anterix and its Industry Insights program is putting on. This is episode 20. Topic is how private wireless broadband can help utilities hit their decarbonization goals. That's a mouthful, but we've got some incredible experts. You don't see our colleague Rohit Nair on here, but he is here from PacificCorp. My name's Pete Tseronis. Again, honored to do this. Big fan of the topic. And I hope that after today, everybody on this webcast is a little more educated, informed, and enlightened, because you've got incredible folks with crazy wisdom on this conversation. So with that, I'm going to introduce by name Mike Brozek from Anterix, Strategic Industry Advisor. Good to see you, Mike. John Kuklinski. Yeah, man. John Kuklinski, Grid Solutions Technology Evaluation Manager for Duke Energy. Good to see you, John. And Rohit Nair, Director of Engineering Standards and Grid Modernization at PacificCorp. A little bit about each of these folks who are going to tell their story in their own words, because if you've ever seen me do my thing, I don't want to read the bio, but we've got Mike Brozek, 30-year veteran of the energy sector, subject matter expertise in everything from operational technology to information technology to the digitization of utility operations. He's a strategic advisor, and he's amazing, and he's worked in a utility for many, many a decade, so he can walk the walk and talk the talk. He's very focused on delivering transformative private broadband that enables the modernization of critical infrastructure, of which there are 16 sectors, for multiple elements and sectors in our economy, including energy, transportation, and logistics. John Kuklinski, 35 plus years, may have you by a few there, Mike, but awfully impressive in the utility industry, with a nuclear, fossil generation, transmission, distribution, and telecommunication background. Awfully impressive. 13 years in those roles, specifically with telecom and management operations and engineering. What does that tell you about credibility? He's currently the customer delivery grid connectivity strategy organization, or a member of, and that grid solutions development role, looking at an integrated grid of the future. So again, John, you bring so much to the table with credibility and authenticity. We're excited. And last but absolutely not least, we have Rohit Nair, who is at PacificCorp, another amazing utility with a bright look onto the future. He's the Director of Engineering Standards and Grid Modernization. He's got his MBA from Sullivan University. He's got a Master of Science from Oklahoma State. He comes to us from India, and man, I'll tell you, Rohit, we're excited to have you, even though we see you, but we definitely can hear you. So with that, I am going to pass the baton over here to Mike Brozek. Mike, a little bit about you. Obviously, feel free to chat about what Anterix's mission is, great company that it is, what it does, why it matters. Same thing for John, then we'll close out this first section with Rohit. Mike, the microphone's yours.
All right, thanks, Pete and John and Rohit. Really happy to be on this webinar today with you guys. You know, the subject here is we're talking about Earth Day and really decarbonization. In the 30 years I was with utilities, started in operations, worked through telecommunications, and then after I retired, I had this tremendous opportunity to come to work for Anterix. I saw throughout my career at the utility a move towards cleaner and cleaner energy. You know, a lot of it started with cleaning up coal plants, putting scrubbers, these sorts of things. And now we're really just taken off, and there's a tremendous transformation that has happened in the industry. When I retired, I saw the opportunity and was very happy to join the team here at Anterix, as they have a really critical piece of a puzzle of a decarbonized future, and that is wireless spectrum that utilities are going to need to use. For a very, very long time, utilities have understood how important communications is to their operations of the grid. They simply have to own the communications network in order to ensure that it will be there when they need it. I like to use the analogy of, we all have a smartphone that sometimes when you have no access to Wi-Fi or carrier, it becomes a very not smartphone. And that's the same way with a smart grid. You've got to have communications in order for it to be smart. So looking forward to our discussion today.
I appreciate that, Mike. And before we jump to John, I love the clean but cleaner energy sector. I love the communication networks, focus, because we all know without spectrum, how can things communicate? And they just do. It's stuff we don't see. And thank you, Mike, for bringing up the word smart in quotes, because two-way communications, you could put smart in front of transportation, cars, planes, trains, the grid. We will get into that. And for our audience, that's when we'll get into some of those buzzwords, but we hope that, again, it creates a light bulb moment. John, a little bit more about you and Duke.
Yeah, thanks everybody for allowing me to participate today. As you had mentioned, my background is pretty broad in terms of experience within the utility sector, which has kind of given me some insights into how each one of these businesses work within the company. But most recently, with transitioning back to the business side within customer delivery, you kind of begin to see a little bit deeper understanding of some of the shifts that are occurring over the last several years, and to kind of play on what Mike was saying. Without a smart network, you have kind of dumb devices that are out there without the connectivity. I think that dives deeper into or can be applied deeper into the telecom industry as a whole. Without telecom, you really don't have the enablement of the functions and the programs that you're trying to bring forward with smart grid. So it's been an exciting ride over the last several years in terms of seeing the shift in the recognition of what telecom can bring to the enterprise. Before, it was kind of almost a given that, okay, it's there, it'll work when we need it. Really not a deep understanding of the importance of what it can bring to the some of the programs that we're going to talk about today. So
wonderful, John. Again, the recognition of that telecommunications underpinning, again, for those watching, I have a love for it. I have a master's degree in it, but without telecommunications, folks, none of these things work. From what Mike mentioned, from a smartphone, there's a dependence on Wi-Fi or spectrum. Let's get to it. And having certain pieces or elements of spectrum to do certain things for certain industries. We'll get into that. And I think in the world that we're living in, John, you talked about, in our prep call, there's so many things at the edge, and we'll talk about that. There are so many devices out there that need to communicate. Without the telecom, they just won't. So we will be hitting on that. Rohit, floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be over here. Rohit Nair with PacificCorp. I've been around with this company for just over 12 years, and when I got out of grad school, my focus was on smart grid, and fortunately, I did get introduced into smart grid in my very first year here at PacificCorp. Have been heavily involved over the years in various different transmission distribution technologies, looking at expanding some of our renewables footprint from solar, community solar to energy storage. And over the past few years, 3 to 5 years now, increasingly heavily involved in enabling communications for increasing our situational awareness from not only our increasing renewables footprint, but also reducing our risk from a wildfire standpoint as well. Since PacificCorp really operates in a very vast geographical territory spanning across 142,000 square miles across 6 states, so it's a pretty vast service territory, significant exposure from a wildfire risk, from general reliability, extreme climate risk, be it storms, be it snow in the area, icing in the area, in addition to the general wildfire, which seems like has been the biggest risk for our utility over the past few years. So really, as you mentioned, communications underpinning, bringing that situational awareness from a real-time standpoint to enable our operators to operate the grid reliably, safely, and really making sure our financial engine keeps moving along is absolutely critical for our company, and I'm pretty sure it is a general industry trend as well.
100%, and forgive me, Rohit, is it pronounced Rohit Nair, right? Correct?
Yep.
All right, my friend, thank you. And if I mess that up, you can butcher my last name. It's Tseronis with a T, it's Greek. So I think I have you down though with Rohit Nair. Great opening remarks. Love the focus on climate I think we all can agree climate's a thing, right? Environmental factors, you watch the news every day. There are things happening in parts of, Mike, your neck of the woods and Midwest where tornadoes are rampant. There are more already this year than there were last year at the end of that season. And we have to look at, you know, this resilience, reliability, John, the difference between the two that you and I and the crew talked about yesterday. Focusing on climate, in other words, is going to help us look at environmental, cyber, and then of course physical risk. So Rohit, thank you for bringing that up. I want to just now we're going to jump into some of this. You know, we used terms in some of our opening remarks that range from IoT to distributed energy resources to spectrum, decarbonization, OT, IT integration, secure telecommunications, private wireless broadband, private LTE. Folks, all of this is tied together, and our experts today are going to help us think about the future, where the puck's going, because that train has left the station. And these two companies, Duke, or should I say, and Anterix, of course, and PacificCorp are all doing their part. So that leads us into the first question. And before I get there, shout out to Earth Day month. We all know Earth Day is a big deal. It kind of encapsulates what our world, our country is focused on, and we need to get to a much safer, secure, cleaner planet of the future. So let's acknowledge that this is timely. So shout out to Anterix for that reference. All right, Mike, first question, and it's for everybody. We talked a lot about in the initial remarks, hey, there's a lot to think about, right? But in the organizations that you all represent, collaboration's critical, both internal and external to your customers. John, you talked about, you know, the voice of the customer in so many words. Decarbonization and goals are great to shoot at. Let's talk, Mike, about the challenge of collaboration across, you know, government, industry, academia, internal. And then John, you and Rohit can respond as well.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. You know, whenever I think about decarbonization, it's really what I would call the first of the 3 Ds. We have decarbonization, we have decentralization, and I'm not even sure this last one's a word, but I call it demarketization. So what's happening is the original model of the electric grid, which was large centralized generation facilities, a matrix transmission grid, and a one-way distribution grid as a way to generate and then deliver electricity all the way to the meter. That is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. And increasingly, we have energy devices, renewables that are wonderful, but they do have a downside, and that is you get it when you get it. For wind energy, you get it when the wind blows. For sun or solar, then you get it when the sun shines. And so, and there's been a lot of advances recently in batteries. I think we're all aware of that. So there's just a lot of change happening, and we're really moving from that centralized model to a decentralized model. Now, the demarketization, what's happening there is consumers are seeing now that they have the opportunity to participate in this overall, what I'm going to call balancing of the grid. You know, the really interesting thing about electricity is there aren't very many economical ways to store it. So most of the electricity that is generated and consumed all happens somewhere around the speed of light. That's very, very quickly. All of our other commodities that we're used to, there is an economical storage solution to help deal with the demands of, you know, supply and demand. Demand goes up, the supply is there. In the case of electricity, this all has to happen nearly at the speed of light. There's some really great articles out there. Pete, you mentioned the 16 critical sectors, and there are also national labs out there. I read a really interesting paper I'd encourage people to take a look at from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It is titled, and I had to write it down, it's a long title, Protecting Power System Frequency with Increasing Distributed Energy Resources. So what they're talking about here is down at the distribution level, solar panels, battery walls, vehicles, these sorts of things. And the fascinating part of this research is throughout all their modeling that they have in their supercomputer, they have come to the conclusion that these remote devices are going to need to respond within 4 seconds from the utility requesting them to turn on, turn off, whatever it is. And a 4-second response, you know, is going to be a challenge to meet. And And I really see the only option is for utilities to deploy a private wireless network to be able to communicate with these devices.
Great call. And John and Rohit, I'm going to come to you with that question, but just to kind of summarize a little bit of what Mike said, or should I say he referenced, and for all of our attendees, we will make sure you get any link or any URL that's mentioned. It's a great reference Mike talked about. Executive Orders 14008, 14057, the National Cyber Strategy. These are ones that you will receive information on. They're great reads. And most recently, of course, the fact sheet that came out in April from President Biden and his catalyzing global climate action through major economies, i.e. energy and climate, really speak to what we're hitting on today and the need for having telecommunications and technology and things understood by the masses in the organizations that these folks work in. John, take that from a utility perspective, you and Rohit. I mean, you're the owners and operators of the very grid we depend on. Government guidance and legislation and regulatory compliance, very important. How do you get that organizational sort of, we have to buy into this because this is where we are in the train, again, left the station on distributed energy?
Yeah, I think, from a Duke Energy perspective, we have bought into that as far as, what we've committed from a carbon reduction perspective overall. But now what we need to, I think, further that is to kind of shrink the challenge. And that's a term that our upper management uses in that if you think about meeting that challenge or meeting the commitments to decarbonization, there's a lot of challenge in terms of retiring generation facilities. So in the meantime, what do you do to make up the gap that you've now created, between what you've previously generated and what you think you're going to generate with or have time to build to generate in a green manner. So collaboration with regulators and manufacturers are going to be, it's crucial in order to try to meet the timelines that we're going to need in order to meet shrink that challenge. But also, in terms of shrinking that challenge, there are going to be some customer related elements to that, and that's around potential EV charging control or some sort of volt var optimization on the grid itself, and then also getting the customer to buy into these programs is going to be crucial in that collaboration perspective. For instance, what I was talking about, the shrinking that challenge, we're going to see a huge growth in the number of devices that are going to be deployed in the edge in order to control that. Mike, you mentioned, a 4-second response time. There's the distributed intelligence platform that's developing in terms of spreading some of that control out to the edge and shortening that time frame for response and the latency required for some of these activities.
John, I just wrote down distributed intelligence, which speaks to, and again, I want Rohit to comment on that collaboration component, because the next phase we're going to get into is some of the technology, the due diligence, the ability to be remote and communicate wirelessly, because we have to have that intelligence, that actionable intelligence, when it comes to our grid hygiene. But thank you for bringing that up, and also just coining the shrink the challenge. I love it. Of course, there are challenges, but we have to go from point A to point B. We have to move the needle. So, folks, if you haven't read the Duke Energy, I think it's titled Your Climate Action Plan. I think there's a climate, I have it right in front of me. I just can't see it at the moment, but there is a climate plan, which spells out how Duke has this roadmap moving forward. So take a look at that one as well. It's a climate report, forgive me, a climate report from 2022. Yeah. Rohit, comment on collaboration and that effort that is not easy.
Absolutely not easy, but inescapable. I mean, that is something that is a core component of our delivery at PacificCorp. Just to give a context about it, PacificCorp traditionally has relied a lot on, because of the region we operate in, we have relied a lot in the fossil fuel generation side of things. So, but due to various regulatory reasons, as well as from a decarbonization standpoint, being the right thing to do for our customers and communities and our business practices, we are shrinking our fossil fuel generation portfolio from almost 60% of coal plus natural gas down to less than 20% over the next 7 years alone. And that's going to increase our renewables portfolio from just 15% to more than 60%. So that's, and this is just for a 7-year period. A lot of enabling some of these renewables, it cannot happen just by the utility alone. It does need a lot of collaboration across the aisle with customers, with communities, so that we take our communities along with us on this journey as we try to decarbonize, because it will have a direct impact to our customers and communities as well. A good example I'll also throw over there is we are one of those utilities, the very first utilities who is trying to do something new on the nuclear side, with partnering with TerraPower, looking at an advanced nuclear plant here in Kremer, Wyoming. So when we talk about partnering, as you can imagine, the state of Wyoming has traditionally been very reliant on a lot of coal energy in that area. But with the workforce now, with the decommissioning of a lot of our coal plants in that area, we are working with our partners, with our communities, with the governor in Wyoming and his office in Wyoming, to make sure that we can use those talents, that incredible workforce that are in Wyoming, and use that level of expertise in a different type of a technology, which might need some training, but it can still be a very engaging technology, and move from the traditional coal area into a modular or the advanced nuclear energy plan that we are planning to implement by 2030. So something incredibly innovative, something that is first of a kind in the industry, in the world, working with TerraPower and our other partners in the state of Wyoming, really shows kind of the level of collaboration that's needed, all the way from within the utility of different stakeholders, as well as working with the communities, working with the state stakeholders, Department of Energy, all the way horizontally and vertically.
I love it. I love it. And as we move now into our technology discussion, teeing everyone up, I'm going to kind of dive into some of the. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Can I jump in just real quick there? I tell you, that was so exciting what Rohit was talking about. And when you talk about collaboration, he hit on a couple of points there. As we move from traditional fossil fuel sources for generation towards renewables, these others, there is going to be displacement. People will lose their jobs. Companies will have to change or maybe even fold. And what he described in taking a look at Wyoming, which is coal country, I mean, that is the Powder River Basin there supplies a tremendous amount of coal throughout the country, and seeing that, and the governor of Wyoming being able to see that there's a change that's being made, and we need to move with it and still provide economic viability for our state. I think that's really exciting and a great example of collaboration that's going to have to take place.
100%. And just to reaffirm, Mike, you mentioned one of our nation's 17 national labs, of which I know Anterix has collaborated with to kind of move this agenda. We have 17 folks. There's 17 of them. They've been around pre-internet. Be sure to look up United States National Laboratories. You'll be amazed. Rohit, I just want to close out to our audience. There's an incredible roadmap known as the Integrated Resource Plan on PacificCorp's website, a path to net zero, similar to what Duke has. Take a look at it, and the focus on smart grid technology, and that'll be our segue. Let me start here with John, and then Rohit, and then finish it out with Mike, because Mike hit on some of these words. The Department of Energy is the sector-specific agency for the energy sector. Say that 10 times. Industrial decarbonization is obviously important to, and I like to say, any agenda, and we're looking at this. And again, we're talking about this living in a place where we have fossil, we have renewable, but again, how does it all communicate? John, the Department of Energy has emphasized optimizing performance, advancing data analytics, using smart technologies in this roadmap in order for us to really understand that health and hygiene. in your hat as a strategist, but a technologist, can you now talk about some of these terms that are being thrown as that could be that underpinning? I mean, everything from private broadband, wireless communications. You can't have the industrial Internet of Things without it. Can you talk about some of the promise of these technologies and innovations?
Yeah, I think you've kind of got to look at where we are today, and we're for some of these remote sites and these grid connected devices that are out there, these endpoints, we're reliant heavily on commercial carriers for that connectivity today. As you see, the changes that are projected to happen within the grid edge, and I'm going to we call it the grid edge evolution, is we're going to see a huge number of in terms of growth of those endpoints. We're going to need to connect and talk to those endpoints. Not just we're going to see a growth in the device, but we're also going to see a growth in the data utilization of those devices as we begin to poll them more frequently to get a better idea of what's happening, to get that real-time look and feel of what's going on with grid. So that's going to have a huge impact in O&M expense. So, privatization, not only is it an O&M, an opportunity to control our O&M, control costs, but it also gives us the ability to add the resiliency component that we talked about. Resiliency is the ability for the community, for the utility to communicate with these devices during gray sky or black sky events, where you see a lot of contention for resources on the commercial networks. Potentially, particularly, we operate in a lot of coastal states, so we've got a lot of hurricane-related challenges that we have to operate through. So the ability to continue to communicate to your grid edge through events like that, give you the opportunity to have more control and a better response in terms of restoration in one way. If you think about, from the resiliency perspective, but just the day in, day out operations, to be able to connect and communicate with those edge devices, to understand what your voltage profile looks like across a circuit from end to end, and to be able to control that, particularly with two-way power flow that we're going to start seeing, vehicle to grid potentially coming to the market, battery walls like Mike was discussing earlier, these not necessarily distribution attached storage, but potentially customer sited front of the meter type of battery storage capability. The ability to be able to control all of those devices is going to be paramount to be able to operate this grid of the future.
I have to comment, and Rohit, right, we're coming to you here in a second. Same kind of topic from your perspective in the utility, but Mike, you had the 3 Ds. I think I had 3 Rs for you, John, which was resiliency, reliability, and restoration. But the idea was around this whole remote connectivity, and I think you are wonderfully. Thank you for that. And then, again, here's a quote from just the Duke report that I read. The intelligent grid of the future will empower customers by offering tools that give them more control over their energy usage, letting them save energy and money. And I think that really speaks to utilities looking at what can we be doing differently. The reliance on carriers, as you mentioned, very important, but the idea of being able for that customer base you have, having access to information for them to understand about their energy usage through wireless communications, private LTE, what have you. It definitely is on what appears to be many a roadmap. So thank you, John. Rohit, why don't you comment a little bit on that? Smart grid and communications and technology. What's your take on this wireless world that we're living in and how to take advantage of the analytics that they can provide?
Yeah, so Mike mentioned about the 3 Ds, you mentioned about the 3 Rs. I'll probably mention about maybe one more D that underpins all the 6 elements, which is digitization, which kind of encompasses all of those elements, either through decarbonization, dematerialization, decentralization to address all reliability, resiliency, and restoration related topics there. Because of the number of new devices, grid edge devices that we are really on a daily basis that we are adding to the grid across the industry, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And how do you really enable some of those monitoring control capability on those devices to have that situational awareness for real-time monitoring, as well as proactively addressing the challenges that exist on your grid, so that you don't have to wait for an outage to occur and restoration to take place post that outage? I think that's where a lot of the focus is being put on right now, in addition to, of course, looking at broader resiliency goals from an extreme weather event standpoint, be it hurricane for the Dukes and the Florida Power and Lights of the world, or the wildfire in the PacificCorp, the Southern Cal Edisons of the world out here on the West Coast, where a lot of these grid edge devices is being really absolutely paramount from an operational standpoint, that allows us to have that situational awareness. Now, when you operate the grid in a service territory of our size, like I mentioned, 144,000 square miles, it becomes extraordinarily challenging and expensive to put wired communication to every single square mile of that territory. That's where really that wireless communication really comes into play. Now, add on top of that the challenges when it comes to having more control on from our standpoint, from a capex and reduction of opex, like John mentioned, as well as adding another layer of cybersecurity, where we need more control on our side and not really rely on third-party entities out there to manage the security elements from that communication infrastructure aspect as well. So when you really bring a lot of these elements together, really, decarbonization or maintaining our grid or operating our grid in a more efficient, reliable manner, with more situational awareness, that wireless communication really starts making a lot more sense from both a business standpoint as well as an operational standpoint.
I love it, Mike. Oh, go ahead, John. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Rohit just said. Relating to not being able to run wired or fiber communications to every single device out there. That the wireless platforms allow you a lot greater flexibility in where you can place devices on your network. So you could place a cap bank or a regulator or a recloser in an optimal location, as opposed to landing it where you've got closest approach for a fiber or a lease service of some sort.
Thank you, Mike. I know you're chomping at the bit, but let me tee you up, my friend. A reader of many a document coming out of our nation's capital. Executive Order 14028 hits on OT and IT integration, and each of you understand the difference between the two. John, I loved it. You hit on what I was about to summarize from Rohit about, wireless, private LTE, broadband, right? If things are connected, it's not always efficient. That was then, this is now. But reliability, Mike, and security, scalability, flexibility, cost effectiveness. Tell us, even hearkening back to your days, and one who understands that train left the station, or we have to integrate the two. What's your take on the technologies out there, and specifically some of the wireless promise?
Well, absolutely. And as John and Rohit have said, wireless is the answer. There's just too many devices. They're at the edge. Along with utilities are not necessarily in charge of when an electric vehicle charger is put in place, or a power wall, these sorts of things. So wireless is really the only true standard. I am, and I have to say, old enough to remember some standards that were wonderful for their time, but they went away. And I think one of the most important decisions for any private wireless operators to first pick the standard. And the answer is obvious. It's right in front of our eyes. And that is LTE, long-term evolution. So many of these telecommunications challenges that utilities might face have already been solved. They've been solved in the telecommunications world. I think about fiber. I think about other technologies. I think about local area network technologies like Ethernet. LTE to me is the wireless version of Ethernet. Once you select a global standard, you're on a path to a future-proof network. I've stopped calling a private LTE network a solution, and I've begun calling it a platform, because it really becomes a platform on which you offer solutions to. You know, one of the flagship companies in the US, which is Southern Company, and through their subsidiary Southern Link, deployed a private LTE network across Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. They set a projection on the number of devices they would have on that network in 10 years. They surpassed that number in 3 years. And why? Because situational awareness is so important. The digitization of this network, when you can begin to deploy devices, maybe they're weather stations, maybe they're pole tilt sensors, maybe they're street light controllers, gunshot detection, the list goes on and on and on. And you can do that without any corresponding O&M fee that you would be paying to, say, a commercial carrier. It's just the doors are wide open. And suddenly, and that's what they've seen, and I think other utilities are going to see this as well. So the OT devices are there, the need is there. What's the connection? It's wireless. What's the solution? It's private LTE. Rohit hit on a really important point, and that is coverage. And that's, you know, really one of the key features of the 900 megahertz spectrum that Anterix brings to this solution, and that is really good coverage and in building penetration as well for many of these devices. I think of like a EV charger, for example, that's being installed in a garage. It's really an ideal spectrum to serve as the foundation for these private wireless networks. And there's been another companies that have headed down that path, and I think there's going to be plenty more. So it's out there. It's all the parts and pieces of this erector set are available. Utilities just need to put it together.
John, any comments on Mike's comments?
Yeah, I'd say that, you know, we know that LTE works today. We're using it. It's been in our, you know, our bucket of tools for some time now. So, you know, we know that the technology works. It's just a matter of learning how to right size a deployment for a private network and operate it. You know, those are some of the challenges that you know, utilities have, is learning how to operate that LTE network. So, and that's something that we're, you know, continually working through on our side in our studies of LTE and how we would deploy it. So, you know, I'd turn it back to you, Pete, but that's kind of my insight at this point.
I love it. Rohit, any comment on Mike's comments before we move to the next question?
Yeah, no, I mean, similar to what kind of John said, it's an evolving aspect, and utilities are really catching up to this technology, even though this is not like absolute brand new technology. It's been around for a few years now, especially on the LTE side of things. So I think with the number of devices that's coming online and the need that the utilities are seeing that is there on the grid, the challenge is to really prioritize it along with the 100 other priorities on the list that also needs to be done at the same time. I think that's the other aspect with workforce staff issues. That's some of the challenge from a training aspect that we have at least come across on some of these related newer technology aspects.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, I'm going to pivot to the next question, but to kind of close this, we talked to decarbonization, and obviously there are goals out there. Rohit, you brought up the cybersecurity component. Folks, the National Cybersecurity Strategy that came out just last month, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the official, March 2023, has 5 pillars. And I'll list one or two, but based on what you've been hearing today. 1, defend critical infrastructure. Pillar 4, invest in a resilient future. Pillar 3, shape market forces to drive security and resilience. If you read the executive summary, all of what these amazing individuals on this panel are addressing are rooted in telecommunication, its history, its legacy, and the fact that now we're a world that depends on billions, if not soon trillions, of interconnected devices, and wireless communications are absolutely a catalyst to achieve those decarbonization goals. That's my 2 cents. I have a little knowledge in this space. I worked at DOE for a bit, but I can tell you right now, when smart grid was talked about in 2008, it was like, yeah, maybe someday. Well, it's a real deal. And shout out to PacificCorp and Duke, because they have these roadmaps. And Mike, if you want to comment on this one, I just got to put it out there because you brought up capabilities and mapping throughout. Anterix's active ecosystem program, building the foundation for a new technology landscape with 900 megahertz and private LTE. Any comment on what excites you about just looking at those companies that are now part of your ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. A little history on the ecosystem. You know, you know, we keep using this term spectrum, and really what this means is a guaranteed right to broadcast at a certain frequency. It's no different than you know, like a radio station we're all familiar with, and you get out of range of a radio station, you start, you know, hearing another one. With private LTE and especially 900 megahertz through Anterix, you have a legal right to operate on this spectrum, and no one else has that right. So you've got, first of all, it's ownership, and that's really extremely important. But to have spectrum, which is a right to use, is not very valuable unless you've got devices that are capable of broadcasting on that spectrum. So that's where the Anterix Active Ecosystem program started out. There's well over 100 members of that initiative right now. Anterix saw the need that we have to have an entire ecosystem of devices for folks like John and Rohit to be able to choose from. There are other options out there that don't have an ecosystem as robust as this one. And one of the things that we also recognize is that it's more than just radio devices and endpoints. A really important aspect of this is cybersecurity. And so we have a special portion of the Anterix Active Ecosystem, which is the security collective. And we've got a number of companies in there that we're showcasing their capabilities. It's another great example of IT and OT coming together. Many of these solutions are IT based, you know, things like defense in depth and heuristics and other types of approaches. And now these can be applied to this private LTE network. And you know, when you think about a commercial network, and there's certainly nothing wrong with commercial networks, they do exactly what they're designed to do, and that is to get you on the internet so you can get to Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, or work, I suppose, even too. With a private LTE network, utilities can design these in a way that there is no access to the internet either direction, and they can really secure these devices. And when I see and hear about, you know, things that are happening across the globe, I think it's really important that utilities look at that and realize that they've got to secure this element of the grid, and that is their communications network.
Thank you. And let's go into this next section. You know, John and Rohit. John, obviously your title alone, when I see Grid Solutions Technology Evaluation Manager, for what it's worth, that tells me this guy knows what he's talking about and can look at a product or a solution or a capability and map it to a requirement, whether it's net zero, leveraging, you know, technology to use wireless comms. How do you, and Rohit, you're getting to get the same question, whether it's you or someone on your team, what are you looking for from the plethora of companies, the silver bullet, quote unquote, solutions that are there to help you make those decisions about how to make an investment, right? You talked about workforce development and having to work with a company that can help govern that implementation, but technology due diligence, how much time do you spend on this, and how do you go about you know, wading through or looking for that needle in the haystack?
That's a good question, and it's you know, that's something that is a continual process, and where you start really is, you know, understanding the background of the company or technology that you're evaluating. You know, does it have a history? Does it have, you know, some level of consistency through its life cycle, through its life period? You know, what is the adoption rate? You know, that we think that it's, how is that going to apply across you know, the industry? So, you know, those are our two key elements that I think that we like to try to understand. You know, what is their product offering? You know, not just a single device, but do they have a plethora of devices that could solve, different problems with either a single product or multi-product? So, it all depends on the technology or the problem you're trying to solve. We're continually looking through different technologies and how they apply to grid control. And that includes, private wireless and fiber and multiple other telecom technologies.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. And again, I knew it was a little bit of a leading question, but I knew you'd answer it somewhat like that. I mean, there's just so much to wade through. And really, it comes down to what I love what you said is, what is the problem that we need solved? I think of it, it's not buy a new product. It's how do we mitigate risk by inserting something that solves that current problem of today? And unfortunately, as we all know in this world, look, our power grid's over 100 years old. When something bad happens, that's when we realize maybe this is where that technology and that actionable intelligence, I think, Rohit, you brought up, teaching the workforce how to view dashboards of data to make those decisions to save lives. So to me, I heard you say that, and thank you for that focus on solving the problem. Rohit, what about you? Technology due diligence, looking for specific capabilities, yes, to meet a problem, but also just to know what's out there.
Right. And I think it boils down to risk reward for a lot of these technologies and value propositions out there, and how it really meets our needs. There are technologies out there that have been around, that a lot of other utilities have utilized it. That the evaluation for those kind of technologies, the due diligence process is much quicker, because it's about working with your peers at other utilities, and then understanding what their lessons learned has been, and then trying to avoid recreating the wheel. So there's the due diligence is shorter, it's much more quicker on some of those pieces. In another case, you would have some technologies that probably is version 1. And we are often seeing some of those kind of technologies in areas such as wildfire mitigation, where there are certain technologies that has really come out of the labs just now, and it's version 1. And how do you really do the due diligence and make sure that the company is going to stick around for enough number of years that 4 years, 5 years, 8 years down the road, we don't have a stranded asset on our grid and no one to support it. So really going through not only that proof of concept and making it work to address the immediate need or the immediate risk, but also looking at it from a long-term standpoint, from a maintenance, training, and operating that particular technology, and the viability of the company supporting that technology being around. I think that's another big, and it's a tricky one to deal with really brand new companies coming out of some of the universities or some of the labs, or existing technology companies who are having spin-offs as well. Some of those things take a different approach and a different time set from a due diligence standpoint.
I love it. John, you were nodding.
The risk reward aspect.
Yeah, forgive me, Rohit. Forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just saw John nodding his head. John, you'd want to comment on any of that?
I was just, that backs up, essentially what I was saying is in terms of understanding the longevity of the product and the vendor that you're getting ready to essentially partner with over that period of time. Life cycles today, they're shorter, but you still need to have that long-term side-by-side partnership for the long haul in order to support a product from cradle to grave, essentially, in terms of how you've got it deployed.
Well said. Mike, I want you to comment on that in this answer, because I want you to have a chance to talk again about that due diligence component. There's more tools than we need. I think of it as a toolbox in today's day and age for utility. Certain things for elements of cyber, types of cyber, identity, access management, remote connectivity, yada, yada, yada. What's your take on the technology due diligence and how a utility today needs to approach it?
Well, one of the things Anterix is really sees themselves as a critical part of this, overall effort that's happening as we move towards this modern grid, And the deals that we've signed so far, and there's 5 customers on the list so far, these are multi-decade agreements. So much like when a utility has to select a land onto which it's going to either build a renewable generation device system or substation or whatever, it's extraordinarily important that you're going to own that for a very long time. And these agreements that Anterix have written to date are multi-decade agreements. So that's step 1. Step 2, when you pick the right standard, and I mentioned that before, it really does help guarantee that there's going to be a vendor that is supporting that standard over time. And I think when we, as I mentioned before about how strongly we believe LTE is that standard, it's because it is literally used by billions of people around the world. We went from 3G to 4G to 5G, and there'll be 6 and 7 and 8G, and utilities don't have to pay for all of that research and development that's being done. You and I and everyone else that pays for this device each month, a portion of that is going into that technology development. So it's no different than, as I mentioned before, Ethernet or fiber technologies or others. We really get the opportunity here to future-proof these decisions. When it comes to security, I should have mentioned zero trust. Zero trust is one of the more important foundational elements for that utilities can deploy, not only on their wired networks, but now also on their wireless networks. And I don't think there's such a thing as future-proof when it comes to cybersecurity. That is an ever-changing, ever-evolving game. So, again, picking the right standard, picking the right partner to work with security, whatever you have today is great, but you're gonna need something different in a few years, and you're gonna have to stay up to date because the threats continually evolve, and the defenses have to be a step ahead of them.
I love it. Folks, Mike introduced zero trust, which is don't trust anything. That's a government term? No, it's a commercial term, and it's a framework. And when you read any article on AI and cybersecurity and private LTE, it comes down to, with all these devices, how can we trust anything? Well, you trust it through the implementation of not just a technology, but working with companies, obviously like Anterix and Duke and PacificCorp. You're working with a lot of companies, that collaboration, bringing it all back to get to those decarbonization goals. And it takes a village, people, process, and technology. So thank you. Rohit, before we move into parting shots, do you have any comments on Mike, since he mentioned your favorite word, standards?
Well, definitely standardization, harmonization, and optimization. Those are kind of the three kind of foundational elements that we kind of focus on when we look at new technology, because we operate, so PacificCorp is part of Berkshire Hathaway Energy, and we have, NV Energy as a sister company in Nevada, and we have Mid-American Energy in Iowa and Illinois, and also across the border in, Altaling in Canada, and also in the UK and other countries as well. So we often look at a lot of our technology roadmaps, a lot of our equipment roadmaps, adoption roadmaps, from a lens of looking at it from a Berkshire Hathaway Energy level. And that's where standardization and really harmonizing a lot of those standards and eventually trying to optimize it to really meet all the goals and training needs across the board, I think that becomes pretty critical as well.
Wonderful. And what I'll do now, thank you, Rohit, is we're going to move into the parting shots. I hope the audience today has been a bit educated, a bit informed and enlightened. I will start by giving my colleagues here a minute or 30 seconds to think about their parting shot, which is what you want to leave with the audience, John, Mike, and Rohit. You heard from each other. You have the wisdom in your brain or in your person who knows all about what you've journeyed. That's why we talked about, you've seen this walkabout and this evolution, and where we are now is things are exponentially more challenging. But shout outs to each of you and for your thought leadership in your companies. I will close with a factoid that I referenced recently at a climate summit, and that is 3 pieces of legislation have passed since 2021. We know them as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. My good friend Mark Gabriel calls it, I think, Uncle Bill and Aunt Ira. But they all have overlapping priorities. But collectively, they've introduced $2 trillion with a T, trillion dollars in new federal spending over the next 10 years. And all of this is focused on a better life for humanity, yes. but they put us on track to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by about 40% below 2005 levels by the time we hit 2030. We hope today, or I hope, that you learned a little bit about the complexity, but also that there are people like John and Mike and Rohit, Anterix, Duke, and PacificCorp who are trying to not only reach those goals, exceed those, and make life better for our future generation. That's my parting shot. Why don't we start with Mike Brozek?
Well, thanks again, Pete, John, Rohit, for the webinar today. I think it's been very entertaining and enlightening. You know, when I think about decarbonization, I think of there was an article put out by the White House report, came out a couple of years ago, and it really described this decade that we're in right now, the 2020 to 2030 decade. This is the pivotal decade if we're going to meet the zero carbon future for us. I feel like that a lot of the easy work has been done, retiring older fossil fuel plants, building renewables, but now the hard work really begins, and that is as we transition, and John mentioned it before, as we move to that edge evolution, utility, if they're going to be able to provide electricity at the right frequency and the right voltage, these sorts of things, are going to have to increasingly have information and control over devices in the field. Wireless is the answer, and Terex has a key component of that, which is spectrum. We have 5 customers signed up already: Ameren, San Diego Gas and Electric, Evergy, Xcel, and now LCRA. If there's any thing to be worried about, it's that there's only so much spectrum out there. And you know, I would encourage everybody listening in to, if you haven't already started your path towards private LTE, start now. You're going to need to pick spectrum, and I encourage you to reach out to Anterix, and we want to work with you because we are dedicated to these goals of a cleaner, better energy system and also Earth for all of us to live on.
Thanks. Rohit, floor is yours.
Yeah, if I, to keep it really short and crisp, I would say, energy transition is what I want, you folks to take away. We are in this incredible moment of time where the entire energy landscape is shifting significantly, and we have to challenge ourselves and think differently, think creatively to see how do we really make sure that we take full stock of this opportunity ahead of us and really do our very best, pushing the boundaries and making sure that we set the stage for kind of the future generations through this energy transition opportunity, through decarbonization, be it 40%, 50%. I know PacificCorp is targeting 70% below 2005 emission levels by 2030. So really pushing the barrier. And beyond that, also, an important thing is adopting new technologies, supporting new technologies, and really creating that holistic framework to operate in for all the utilities and our communities in general as well.
Thank you so much for those comments, Rohit. John, close us out. Parting shots.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to all the panelists and everybody on the call today for sitting through this. This, as Rohit mentioned, this is really exciting times in terms of change in our industry, and I want to encourage everybody to embrace that change, to really get behind it, work through the challenges. Mike mentioned earlier that this is a 100-year grid. It's so you kind of look at this as if we're trying to change the tire while driving the car down the road. So it is a very exciting time in terms of the change that we're seeing overall, and like Rohit was mentioning, major carbon reduction targets over by 2030, and 50% for Duke Energy of CO2 emissions and net zero methane emissions as well, and then net zero carbon dioxide, CO2 emissions by 2050. Those are some lofty goals, and we've got to work hard to attain them. So I would just encourage everybody to don't be afraid of it, get behind it, do what you need to do, embrace it. It's going to be exciting to be a directional force in making that change happen.
Well, John, Mike, Rohit, the wonderful folks behind the scenes, Danielle, Natasha, Tara, and Anthony, thank you for the opportunity. I fully enjoyed this discussion. I hope our attendees as well. And again, we will follow up with any acronym we said or website. But shout out to each of you, John, Mike, and Rohit. You're amazing thought leaders. Thank you for your time and your attention to this matter.